Hello and welcome to another episode of the Whole People Group podcast. At Whole People, we recognise that organisational excellence is deeply intertwined with the well-being of its people. Our mission is to seamlessly integrate well-being with performance because we understand that when individuals thrive, so does the entire organisation. Today, I am joined by John Pearson. John has joined us as an associate and he's been helping us build Whole People as a startup. As we always say, we're a startup, but we're far from a startup. John has had a fantastic career, co-founding Virgin Radio, working with Richard Branson, Chris Evans, involved in, well, I think maybe co-founded or CEO of Ginger Media, and then later on went on to become chairman of Shazam and chairman of lots of other companies. John, it's an absolute honour to be here. I always enjoy catching up with you, but I've been looking forward to recording some of the wisdom and thoughts that I get to hear on a weekly basis.
Hi, Simon. Thank you.
So, John, let's start. I mean, I know your story, and I think your story is reasonably well known. But I'd love to know before we get into sort of where you've been. I mean, I'm just really interested in what you're up to now. You know, I think there's these things you've done in the past, but what are you up to?
Well, okay, there's two things I'm up to now. Basically, what I do is I'm a mentor and a wingman for senior executives, mostly of growth companies. I've done a lot of growing of companies from small to big, a lot of startups. And for me, I think startups are risky and hugely stressful, time consuming. Big companies I've chaired, stock market companies. It's mostly admin and regulation, but scale ups are fun and challenging, and so that's kind of where I am. And also it's one of those. I've got 48 years of experience of doing this, and experience is a funny thing. You get it seconds after you just needed it. And over the years I've worked with sticky issues, staff, raising money, shareholders, M&A, challenging environments, challenging boardrooms, all that stuff. And so I work with executives and do that. The second thing I'm doing, and this is where that got you and I to work together, Simon, and I've really enjoyed that, is I'm working with managers, founders, CEOs to prevent burnout. And that's one of the things I know we're going to talk about hugely today, because nothing's easy these days. And from my experience, we'll go through, all the things that I've done, but the one thing that I never told people in the middle of it is that I had a massive burnout halfway through my career. In fact, I always tell people I've been so lucky. I've had two separate careers, which I have, but they were marked by that burnout period. And I always explain it as being, I took a couple of years off. I didn't. So,
right.
Yeah.
I think it's really, I think that there's this public, your past has been in the public eye quite a lot, right? And I think that so maybe you could just tell us a little bit more, because obviously we've got the public face of, co-founding Virgin and then moving into Shazam. But I mean, maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about that experience, because you've got, 47 years is a decent whack of time to have been working.
Yeah, no, it is. It's gone very quickly. And as a teenager, I was passionate about music and had no talent. So then got a job selling advertising in a radio station. I worked for Capital Radio in London in the 80s. And the 80s was, if you remember, it was the age of Margaret Thatcher. Greed was good. And to be in the ad industry in those days was a fantastic experience. I think most of the skills you need were being able to stand up whilst drinking a lot rather than anything else. But it was a great place to learn. It was a fantastic background. By the time we got through to the 90s, I'd worked myself up to being a very senior manager. In 92, I joined Richard Branson and others, and we launched Virgin Radio. I was the CEO of Virgin Radio through the 90s. We had Chris Evans doing our breakfast show, and at the end of that, Richard was keen to sell the station. We borrowed £42 million and bought it ourselves, which was a kind of a fun thing to do. And we created Ginger Media, which was Chris Evans's TV company and the radio station together. So I worked across those. We did TFI Friday. We actually did the lottery show as well, which was an awful disaster, I've got to say. But the more we did more TV than people think. People remember TFI Friday because it was part of that 90s. There was an epicenter of culture in the late 90s, and we were lucky to be in the middle of it. It was Britpop. It was lads culture, if you remember all the magazines, FHM and Loaded, and of course Chris was the king of lads culture. It was a very boysy drinking environment, and we were at the sharp end of that. But of course, also what was happening, and for me, I'm now running a decent sized company in radio and television, and of course everything we're doing is on the front page of the papers. Everything we get right, everything we get wrong. Chris was, I think, at his creative peak. He was fantastic. People used to listen to the show, couldn't get out of their cars. It was so good, and obviously we were making a lot of money. We were doing high pressure stuff. And then what happens with that? We then sold the company. The pressure increased because then, of course, the fun went out of it. We were bought by a Scottish PLC, and we had to do earnouts and things. And what then happened to me is that slowly but surely, and we'll talk about these key stages, it just crept up on me. I was working harder and harder to stay still. It was unbelievably bad. So when I eventually managed to do, and I was on a year's contract, eventually managed to get out of my earnout, I went home and I told everybody, I'm just going to have some time off and, a bit of thinking time before I do something else. Well, actually, no, I was completely burnt out. It took me 2 years to recover. We'll come back on that. But at the end of that, a friend of mine phoned me and said, "Look, I've just invested in a music tech company, and I'd like to be a chair. We're looking for a chairman. Would you like to come in and be the chairman?" And I said, "Well, I've never actually been a chairman, and actually, I've had a few chairmen, but they're not exactly role models." So I did it, and that turned out to be Shazam. By the time the smartphones came out in '96, we had a fully developed product. We were one of the first apps on the smartphones, and all of a sudden, we've got like a billion users. This thing's going off like a rocket. We eventually sold it to Apple. That was fantastic. But what it did for me then, I guess, was it suddenly made me a tech chairman. I got dragged up with it, holding on to other people's brilliance, I've got to say, and that's led me to my second career, which is I've spent the last nearly 20 years chairing tech companies, which I've now stopped doing, and I'm now doing more of the mentoring and spending some more time.
I remember when you spoke to me. I remember when you spoke to me about potentially joining Whole People, and I remember thinking, USP and what we're looking to do is bring lived experience into the workplace, right? And it's kind of a bit crazy that we haven't had more of that, to be honest. I remember thinking to myself, the amount of lived experience that you had of high pressure, these growth startups, fast. I didn't quite realize the depth of experience you'd had with Burnout and the off the field stuff, because I guess we haven't in the past really spoken about that stuff.
No.
It strikes me that you understand more than anyone I know. That's why I've lent on you quite a lot in the last 6 months to 12 months. You understand how hard it is. You understand the how tough it is in these environments where, because there's a bit of a glittery feel to it from the outside looking in. Everyone thinks it's glamorous and glittery, but you understand more than anyone I've ever known how that's not the case, and how there are perks, but it is incredibly tough to be in leadership, let alone foundership, CEO, or chairman even.
Yeah, the chairman is it's a different thing, I think, but certainly from being a CEO, it's interesting when you're the CEO these days. It's tough out there. You've got 360 degrees you are selling every day. You're selling downwards to your staff. You're selling sideways to your C-suite managers. You're selling up to your board. And unless you've got a very good chairman it's interestingly, one of the CEOs that I chaired, he used to phone me up on a regular basis and just literally rant at me for 10 minutes. And then he'd go, "Thank God for that," because that was it. That was he loved that function. He could just rant and rave and about things that were going on. But I think also there's a difference here for me, I was brought up, my parents went through the war, and I was brought up in an environment that was like, just suck it up. just get on with it. Stop moaning. And I think that culture is now thankfully, changing, because what it does is it represses things. And I think you've also got that male, alpha male bit where, no one wants the humiliation of saying I'm not well, especially I'm mentally not well, or I'm stressed, and it's a weakness. And of course, when you get yourself into a position, even the C-suite managers, it's difficult to get there, and you don't want to be, you've got too much going on in your life. And nowadays, you've got this relentless pressure. You've got accountability. You've got investors and boards with very, short fuses and patience. You've got 24/7 connectivity, which means you can never relax. The economy's not helping. And these guys are jumping ship. There's a whole amazing, in the C-suite managers, especially, I think, Russell Reynolds did a survey last year. 9% of executives changed jobs last year, and they think that could double this year.
Wow.
Deloitte did a mental health survey. 16% of managers said they plan to leave in the next year. 60% of those said it was because of mental health and well-being. I mean, that's shocking. Deloitte said that it's costing the economy £51 billion a year now, mental health in companies and executives. It's just shocking, right? So, and these people, there's more stress accumulating outside of work. I mean, you're in that zone now, Simon, which is that 30 to 50-year-old thing, where not only is that the time when your career is peaking and you're most valuable, and you've got career jeopardy and all that going on, but also you've got a home life that may have a partner that works. You've got children, you've got a mortgage, you've got maybe ailing parents. The stress is just like a pressure cooker, and I think that's genuinely not easy, and that's what's burning people out.
Absolutely, and I think, if I think I'm a reasonably well-resourced person. My recovery's given me, I've got counselors and coaches and things like that. But when the pressure's on, I think that this is where the lived experience and knowing the environment comes in, because it's not so much about just being able. I mean, look, we talk about employee assistance programs, right? Yeah, you can go to an app and you can talk to a counsellor, but actually going to someone. I mean, when I've come to you in this, and I'm glad the 30 to 50-year-olds are being recognised in this, because when you've got new kids, and things are going up, and also you don't have the experience. The thing that is needed is that experience. I've called you up, and I think I've had those 10-minute rants at you numerous times as well. And I also find myself regurgitating the experience is what you get 1 second after you need it. I said that, I think, twice yesterday, because you've taught me that. It's those frameworks that you've given me through the lived experience. And I think that might be what people are missing. Is people talk about safety all the time, like safe spaces, but actually what they're talking about is talking to people who understand what they're talking about because they've been there.
Yeah.
So I think this is really interesting, and I know we've shared a lot of discussion around prevention, and being just the absolute has to be the main focus, because the cost goes up as soon as you have to intervene with burnout or treat the after effects of burnout. I mean, the cost to a business, but also the cost to the person who's burning out becomes catastrophic.
It's dreadful.
And you've really brought the focus on prevention as just something that we absolutely need to focus on. So I'm wondering if you might be able to tell me a bit more about, preventing burnout and that cycle.
Well, that's got to be the place to be, because and that's what's led me to do this. When I've been doing the mentoring and working with CEOs, is that actually half the time they don't realize where they are on the scale. They're just, denial is all there. So, I mean, for me, there are two things. Number one is what I call the pre-burnout danger signs. Often you bring them on yourself, and I think I did for me all those years ago. If you've got excessive drive and ambition, often the pressure to work harder is your own. Sometimes the company is doing it to you as well, but sometimes it's your own ambition is doing it to you. Then often people work in toxic work environments. People are badly managed. Even senior managers can be badly managed, and the stress that causes is huge. And there's long hours. And thankfully, we're getting away. I mean, COVID's changed, I think, a lot of things, but we're getting away from the culture of people putting in stupid long hours, because that's a real killer. But for me, I think there are four stages of this, and I've named them. The first one I think is it creeps up on you, which is where you don't really know it, but it's advancing. And these are subtle accumulative shifts that are happening to you. First of all, you don't see it. Stage 2 is when you are starting to feel it. So in stage 1, you feel dissatisfied, you've got cynicism, you're complaining, you're dismissing problems, and you're starting to feel anxious and a bit stressed. Stage 2, which is you're starting to feel it, is where you're lacking joy across your life. Things, even your hobbies, you don't get any joy of them. You start feeling empty. You're still denying it. You've got behavioral changes. You're getting snappy, aggressive. You're not sleeping well. You've got emotional exhaustion, and that's no energy, which means, guess what? No concentration. Your performance is starting to go, right? But at that point, you look as if you're absolutely functioning rather well around you, and you can hide it from everybody. Stage 3 is now it's hurting. It's hurting you, and you know it's hurting you. So is that heavy, suffocating feeling of dread that you get every morning when you wake up. You feel helpless. Everything you think about, you feel totally negative. You're detached, you withdraw. That then leads, the last one of those points is depression. And that's, people, it's well documented, depression, and what that can do and how bad that can get. For me, stage 4, where it's a big problem, and where you trip to stage 4 is where you can't function and you can't hide it. That's the point. Most people are functioning burnouts. I was a functioning burnout. I was keeping it from everybody. But if you can't hide it, then you're in trouble. You're at that point mentally or physically collapsing. You're at 100% burnout, and by that time you've got to either leave. You've got to take a sabbatical. You've got to leave your job. You've got a serious problem. And what we've got to do for this whole generation of people coming up is we've got to stop them from getting anywhere near stage 4. If we can get them to stage 2 and go, whoa, what can we do about it? That's the way to do it. And of course, then there's the worst case, as we know, Simon, you and I have talked about, is that male suicide now is dreadful, and with obvious consequences across the families and lives and God knows what. But for businesses as well, it's a killer in a business. It really is. I mean, I know you've worked with some businesses where they've had senior suicides, and staff then go, I'm not sure I want to go to that business because it's obviously got a culture of that's wrong inside it. We're also hearing about people, relatives left behind, now taking businesses to court because they've had a bad culture for so many years. This is a serious problem. Seriously.
Yeah, it's a really big problem. And it's interesting, you talk about that stage 4 there, and there's a point there where you can't hide it anymore.
No.
That fear of humiliation that we speak about, really deep fear that people have, I think that might be when people are opting to take their own lives and to do anything other than it come out. And I think your message is really important, because I think, it's a bit like taking your car to get serviced, isn't it? Right? Like I've said to my clients numerous times, why is it that when your car has a little warning light on it, you'll go straight down the garage?
Yeah.
Right. Well, when your body's giving you warning lights, why are you not going to the doctor? And why don't you come and talk to someone? Right. Like we treat our cars better than we treat ourselves. Yeah. And we get these warning lights that come on, and we just don't take them seriously. And then the next thing it comes. And the only thing that I would add into that is I think that the second of your 2 stages come quicker than the first 2 come on. And I think you can go through 3, 4 pretty quickly. And I think that's the scariest part. I think number 1 can take a long time, 2 can creep up, it all creeps up. And then 3, 4, it can be a couple of weeks, right? And it's like a mini sleep in a car.
So you're right about the humiliation thing, and I think that's where I was, which is I would never have told people. And if we can get to people, through the whole people organization, if we can get to managers and do things privately with them where they don't have to come out and tell everybody, and that's a great thing, because there is some bad news. The good news is we're all across it now, everyone understands it, and things are being done. The bad news, there's no quick fix. See, here's the problem. I mean, they're all the understood talk. There's no silver bullet. There's no mental health download 2.0 that you can then just download into yourself. It doesn't work that way. there are the available tools, and everyone knows the tools, which are exercise, nutrition, rest, recovery, all that stuff, which I think are the foundations of recovery. They won't fix you, but they will stabilize you, I think. And those are the first things to be putting in, and they're well documented. But I think for me, in the stuff that I've done with people, it's collaborative discussion. It's it's thinking, it's managing choices, creating time and space, establishing boundaries, focusing on achievable outcomes, and pragmatic action. Not just stuff you can actually do and stuff you work with on a daily basis, and the feeling that you've got help.
And the thing that's always, I mean, if I think about my own sort of, maybe I was going through 1 and 2 and you've come in and helped me. The thing that I think that's most interesting, there's 2 things that you've said there. One is that not everybody has to know you're going through burnout. If you get it early enough, it can be contained with someone like yourself, a mentor, a coach, a decent chairman. If you're a CEO, might be able to create some boundaries around it. But the second thing too is that your performance doesn't have to drop. And actually, all the things that you're talking about there as ways of stabilizing it, collaborative thinking, managing choices, they're all high performance.
Yeah.
They're structures of high performance, which makes me think that if people are proactive and maybe brave enough to reach out in stages 1 and 2, that actually performance doesn't need to drop. No one needs to know. And it can be easily managed through a course of good mentoring and coaching.
Yeah.
On the flip side, it's the opposite of that if it's not got early enough. So it does feel like there's a real turning point there where people have to take action.
Yeah, I agree.
So John, my final question is, if someone's listening to this podcast and I'm going to do the 1, 2, 3, if they think tomorrow I'm going to do the first 2, if they think to themselves, oh, you know what, it's creeping up on me, what do they do? So if you're talking to a CEO right now of a decent sized company, what do they do right now today as a step?
Well, the obvious, you're giving me the obvious goal here, Simon. They should come and talk to whole people and immerse themselves in what we and all the other associates can do. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do, and I think the key here is, as we said already, is it's a bit like being an alcoholic, where, as you know, Simon, the key to it is going, hang on, I'm coming out with it. Even though we talk about doing it behind, you've got to come out to yourself. You've got to go, I need some help. And I think that help is available. It's either help or there's things we're talking about, the mentoring, the programs, there's stuff out there that you can do. And that's what you and I have been working with now, or towards for the last, almost for the last year, I guess, with whole people.
That's right. John, it's been a pleasure, and I personally work with equity partners who are pretty much CEOs, have got big balance sheets and big teams, and they're under a lot of pressure. And I have seen personally over the last 4 or 5 years what burnout can lead to. And my final comments on burnout is I wonder how much divorce, chronic illness, suicide, loneliness. I think maybe we're dealing with a real root cause here, which is I think that a lot of the stuff that we're hacking away at the branches a little bit. And I think some of the roots here are that people are burning out and they're tired on a level, and that we don't have safe, experienced people to come in and help them, stabilize them and help them out.
And we come back to the thing that we always talk about, which is lived experience. And you can go and talk to a therapist, but a therapist is giving you, I mean, they do a great job, and I'm not knocking them, but what they'll do is they'll give you a theory from a book. And I think the thing about whole people and lived experience is you're talking to someone that's been there, has that T-shirt, and and therefore empathizes and works in a different way.
And there's if I think about, I worked with a bowling coaches when I was playing who had read the manual, and they were a level 4 coach, but when I went and worked with Mike Hendrick up at Derby, who had 1,000 first-class wickets, I used to walk onto the training ground and he would say to me, go home. And I'd go, what? And he'd go, he knew I was exhausted by the way I walked in. And there were other times when I was exhausted, he knew I needed to do more, and he just knew there there was something in his way of just being with me that 1,000 first-class wickets, that's what had created him as he was. And that's always been my guidepost for whole people, because I know when you get in the presence of someone who has experience, so much is unsaid, so much can't be communicated on a podcast, and I know that you're going to bring that to our clients. So I just want to thank you, John, for the podcast. And if anybody does want to reach out, with burning out, make sure you get in touch, because it's not something to be left alone.
Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, John.